fun people, I'm Isaac Carlson, and on Following Dreams, I'm focused on exploring the stories of people who are following their passions and achieving their dreams. I want to help inspire you to pursue what you love by hearing how others have done it. Today I'm speaking to a man who has spent decades in the film and television animation industry. From working on Disney Renaissance classics like Mulan, Hercules, and the Hunchback of Notre Dame, to his work on shows like Futurama, Gravity Falls, and of course my favorite, Tangled The Series, he has been assisting the creation of wonderful animated stories. To see the show he helped develop that sends Rapunzel on a dramatic and musical journey, check out Tangled The Series Season 3 on Disney Channel and Disney Now, which premieres on October 7th. Welcome, Chris Sonnenburg.
Well, great to be here. Thank you so much. That was a great intro. Thank you so much. Great to be here and answer some questions for you guys.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to have someone who helped create this Disney Channel show that really got me back into watching animation on a consistent basis on television. Being able to talk to you is just kind of surreal after seeing your name at the beginning of the show every single week.
Oh, thanks. Well, it's great to be here. And, you know, it's when we started making the show, I think one of the main goals was to get people to really take animation on television as seriously and the stories as seriously as some of the live action shows that are being produced. We really wanted to up some of the storytelling and the animation, the performances and the music all across the board and lift it to a place where it could welcome the people that are used to that level of quality with the features.
Absolutely. And that's something that I've definitely been able to notice with Tangled the Series, that it feels to the same type of level and quality that the feature animated films get, and sometimes even more like deep, because you're able to go in it for so much longer than a feature film.
Yeah, agreed. We all, you know, the crew, the writers, the designers, we're all under a lot of scheduling limitations, but we didn't want that to really get in the way of the quality of the designs or the music or the story. So we spent a lot of time up front when we were developing the show to really make sure that the story and the characters had that time to breathe and find the depth that all of the fans come to love in the features.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's kind of like the Lord of the Rings model of planning the whole thing out and finally having a direction throughout, which I think is something that really shines through and makes the quality of every single episode that much more elevated.
Yeah, thank you. It also, on a television level, it opens itself up to discovery. There are certainly a lot of times in writing and storyboarding where we discovered things that we didn't necessarily plan, and things that open themselves up to new stories and new ideas along the way. But certainly having a blueprint from the beginning really helped that process.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So,
cool.
First thing that I always like to ask is kind of detached from Tangled the Series and going back into the beginning of your career, how did you find your passion, and what would you say your passion is that gets you excited about everything that you've been working on?
So I think originally some of the first things, of course, as a young kid growing up, certainly the things that were around me a lot growing up was a television set. I was raised kind of in the late 70s, early 80s, where the TV was kind of a big part of me growing up. I loved watching cartoons in the morning and television late into the evening, and telling stories and really getting to know characters on a daily or weekly basis are some of the things that I loved, talking to my friends about at school. And drawing was also a big part of my youth. I loved drawing characters from the cartoons that I had watched, and I think that just eventually evolved into a passion for telling stories through drawing. I think the two things that I love the most, bringing those things together and seeing things like The Jungle Book or The Little Mermaid, really, it brought something up in me that I recognized in terms of beautiful artwork alongside characters that I really cared about. And I felt that there was something in those experiences that I really wanted to be a part of. in some way or another, whether that be animation or whether that be some other aspect to the process. I really wanted to be a part of the making of these classics in some way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're incredible experiences to have, and it's definitely something that is latched on to me as well, and that I clamor to support and continue to uplift as well. Was there a specific moment that you decided that you had to pursue this? Is there something that like flipped inside you?
Yeah, I kind of, when I look back on my experiences, especially some of those early ones, we had in my art class in high school, I think I was in 11th grade, when we had someone come to my high school, it was like a career day type thing, and we had somebody from California Institute of the Arts, which is an art school out in Santa Clarita in California. We had someone come out and talk about the school in our art class, and some of the key words that he had used at the time were Disney and the studio and animation. I didn't really even know what animation was when I was like in 11th grade. I had never seen a piece of animation paper, but he was talking about a career telling stories through drawings, and that really, my ears, like I wasn't super great at school, but for some reason when he was talking about the storytelling aspect through drawing, I was like, wow, that's really something that I love. And I remember at that point, like running home and telling my mom about this school, and she did research on it, and we went and visited the school. But that first part, when he was kind of explaining that there was a school that taught you how to make cartoons, was something that really caught my attention and caused me to really focus on my drawings in a different way than I had kind of approached them before that. I think I really loved illustration. I loved movie posters, but I'd never really thought about drawing in context of storytelling or animation. And I think at that time, The Little Shop of Horrors had just come out. It was a live action movie, but it seemed like a cartoon. It seemed like like an animated movie, and I loved that movie so much. And the music in it, my mom brought me up around musicals. We went to theater a lot, and seeing that there was this combination of all of these things really got me excited and interested in the career.
That's incredible. That's so cool that you were able to have that experience with someone from CalArts. I've begun to do research into like how the institute was like began and everything, and it's fascinating to read about, because it seems like that is the place to go, and everyone talks about it in bonus features of movies. So it's
it's funny, but at the time, like you're talking like 1988, 1989.
Yeah,
there was no internet. There was no way to really do any kind of research or be inspired to pursue it. So again, like this one representative coming to the school was my one shot at being inspired to pursue it. And it was such a small little like look into this larger world of animation. And once I visited the school again, like my entire like reference point for inspiration was ground level. Like I couldn't really do any research or really get stories from anybody else other than going there and seeing the place and meeting the students that were there at the time, and just being incredible. Like it was like an instant download of inspiration, being there and seeing the school and seeing the students and seeing animation paper and all the things that kind of keep that place and make it so alive. Was not through a computer screen. It was me actually going there and experiencing it. And I think the excitement level, at least on my part, was so disproportionate to the things that had been that were inspiring me before that it just from that point forward, once I kind of walked through those doors, I saw, it was a seminal moment. Like I saw the rest of my life kind of folding into place there.
Yeah, well, because now it's very easy to like message recruiters or contact employees, but that was a completely different world, and that's that's so like inspiring to know that then it all like kind of came together, and that was the first action that brought you towards what you actually wanted to do.
Yeah,
So,
again, because even at that time, like, people didn't really talk about animation. Like, now animation is like, there's fans of it, and you're into anime, and there's like different flavors of animation, and you like, and you have other people that you can talk to online and be inspired by. But back in the, I hate to say, I sound like such an old person, but back in those, like, I didn't really have a lot of friends that I could talk to about, about what was so great about the school or what was inspiring about it. So being able to go there and then go home and just kind of sit at my drawing desk and be like, this is what I'm going to do. It was so concentrated, you know what I mean? As opposed to being spread out over, like, being spread out over a discussion group or fans that you can kind of pick and choose things that you love. It was so concentrated that like I felt like I had no other choice but to pursue animation.
Yeah. And especially like pre-Renaissance Disney, there was like, it was such a huge gap of like mind-blowing box office powerhouse animation that hadn't happened in literally decades. So that makes so much sense.
It's so true. No, it's so true, because I think at that point, like going into 1989, 88, 89, Little Mermaid had come out, and that was, again, like just the first of what would become, this entire age of resurgence of animation. But it was so new, and there weren't a ton of people that were pursuing it at the time. So if you loved it, you were a very small group of people. And I feel like once we went to like my class at CalArts, it was like, oh, there's more people that love it. Like, oh, you like it too? Like, whoa! Like, it was such a discovery, as opposed to now, when there's like, you can so easily find other people that love what you love. Back in those days, it was so hard to find other passionate people that wanted to do this nutty thing of drawing every frame. Like, are you crazy? You want to draw every frame of animation? What are you, crazy? And pursuing that on such a visceral level, it was so inspiring, and it was so alive at that time.
And so, did you go to CalArts then after that?
Yeah, I immediately. Once I was there, I started talking to a few students, and the dean of the department took me aside and showed me a portfolio of the things that they liked to see. And I went back and talked to my art teacher at the time, who was completely supportive of me. Her name was Julie Tabler, and she just got me focused. She understood kind of what they were looking for, and we started working on my portfolio to be accepted. And I think a year after that, when I was a senior, I went back and showed my portfolio and was accepted, and went there the fall of 1990.
So
yeah.
When you went, was there any point where you regretted the path, or was something that like shocked you about animation, or was this like it all lined up once you got into the program and everything?
No, that's a good question. That's a really good question, because I was thrown in, because I graduated high school with zero idea what animation really was, and I was thrown into a class of artists that had gone to art school for 3 or 4 years, or people that had come from other countries that were amazing. Craig McCracken was in my class. Sergio Pablos was in my class. John Ripa was in my class. Like, these huge, that are, giant names now, but they were next to me. And to say that it was intimidating, or that I was intimidated, is an understatement. I felt like there was no way that I was going to make it, in this school or be on that level. It was incredibly intimidating, and I there were many, many, many nights when I felt like, what am I doing? I don't belong here. I don't think I can do this. But we had great instructors that kept inspiring me and kept giving me fuel to keep going, and to, again, the passion and the love of the art form kept me inspired to keep trying. I mean, it was definitely hard. Animation is a very intense, tricky thing to even grasp. And being surrounded by so many talented people is intimidating, but it also is inspiring. So I was kind of caught between these two aspects of my personality, of like, maybe I should just go home, but then I would see something, or we'd go see Beauty and the Beast, and I'm like, no, this is the greatest thing. We got to keep going. So I pushed through and kept going.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it all paid off in the end. You were able to work on a lot of really cool films and a lot of cool projects. And so once you got out of school, like, what was the process to get to the place to actually work on a film?
I feel like I was really lucky, again, looking back and looking at the industry now and how many people really love it. It isn't, there's a lot of content to be made right now, so there's a lot of jobs that are available for people, but at the time there wasn't a whole lot. And Cartoon Network didn't exist. There were only a handful of studios at the time that were looking for new talent, and there were only we weren't a big class of students at the time, but we submitted our portfolios to the handful, and I got an internship at what at the time was Turner Entertainment, which made Cats Don't Dance, and Page Master was another movie that they had made. Mm-hmm. And we went there, and it was actually it was connected to Hanna-Barbera at the time. Mm. So we were near the Hanna-Barbera studios, where Bill Hanna and Joe Barbera they were still alive, and they were there, and we got to meet them. But that was my first job out of school, was just kind of interning at Turner. And then after that, I worked on a show called The Critic, which was a primetime show. And my first movie was actually The Swan Princess, that came out the same summer as The Lion King. And I think we know who won that battle, but yep. That was my first movie.
Man, and what, like, does the pressure become larger once you get out of school when it's an actual full-on production? Like, these are, like, that's something I've always wondered as someone who, like, appreciates animation and who at one point aspired to do something like that. What is the environment like?
Well, it's very alive. Again, a lot of the studios back then, again, like, it's such a different time that we're talking about. Animation mm-hmm. hasn't quite hit the top yet. Lion King, broke tons and tons of records, but at the time, Disney was still kind of fledgling in terms of a studio. There wasn't like the giant Disney feature animation building. They were still like in these small buildings in Burbank, Glendale, mm-hmm. and you didn't really think of them as this machine. It was still kind of this accessible little art form. So at the time, as alive and exciting as it was as an animator, as somebody at the studios, it wasn't like this large thing that everybody was looking at just yet. And then again, mm-hmm. like, so after I left The Swan Princess, I started working I applied to Disney at that time and got in to help finish up Pocahontas, which was my first Disney film. Mm-hmm. And again, it was a tiny little building in Glendale, and we, it was not glamorous at all. There was a lot of just partitions and people walking around. It wasn't like it wasn't glamorous by any means, but it was incredibly inspiring to see other people's work, to be around people like Glenn Keane and all the animators that were there at the time. To be shoulder to shoulder with them was incredibly inspiring, and it caused my group of friends who had just started there to really dedicate ourselves to working hard, focusing, and really putting in our hours to earn our way to feel like we could be a part of this thing.
Yeah, because unknowingly to all of you guys were like creating history, making these films, because they're like like tent poles now for the Disney studios.
Yeah, that's so funny that you say that. But yeah, at the time, like, we were just trying to keep our heads above water and trying mm-hmm. to like stay employed, and I remember having late nights being like, man, they're going to fire us any day. Like, we're just going to be out homeless, like we didn't feel like we could make it. But again, and it wasn't quite the large movement that, again, animation is today. So we certainly didn't look at it like that then. And looking back on it, like you say, these giant tent poles, it was fun being there, but it was more in the moment of what we were looking at, the people we were around, the inspiration that we were getting from our peers and from the people above us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was more the environment and the people than the macro scale of what was actually occurring. And
exactly.
Yeah. And so was going to Walt Disney Animation, was that like the dream at the time for animators like you, or was it just another job that you were hoping to do animation for?
No, it certainly was a dream of mine and a lot of my friends. Now, there were other studios that were starting up. Again, you have to remember that Cartoon Network didn't quite exist, but there were people like Craig McCracken who were inspired by an entire other kind of animation, like television animation, and telling short stories and being much more stylized and much more caricatured with their storytelling. So, for a certain amount of my peers, Disney was the apex, and it was certainly the place that you wanted to be. But there were certainly important things happening in animation at the time that, looking back on it, like you say, these tent poles, like the Powerpuff Girls was seminal. I mean, in terms of like somebody doing something in animation that didn't look like anything else, but was incredibly inspiring and incredibly colorful and dynamic and beautiful. The art direction was gorgeous. So there was things happening around us that it didn't feel like we were on an island of Disney. It felt like we were amongst a lot of people that were doing really important and fun things for our art.
That it wasn't just Disney setting the stage, but there was a lot of other things that were going to push animation forward. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and inspiring. Even though we weren't doing things like, things that were happening at other studios, it was neat to see the other studios creating characters and stories that were special on their own right. And I remember being so, again, like I was on no level with Craig, but I remember looking at the Powerpuff Girls and being so proud of saying, like, this is so different, but it's so successful, and being really inspired by just that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and a lot of those television shows that were beginning with animation, they kind of spawned all of the modern day, like Nickelodeon cartoons and like the adult cartoons. It all kind of began at that time. So there was definitely a lot going on in the animation industry.
Yeah, The Simpsons had just kind of started and kind of got off of the ground and was really becoming the hit that it was. Again, like you're talking about 1993, 94, 95. I mean, that was kind of like the big years for The Simpsons, where they were becoming, instead of just this kind of side piece of animation, it was becoming part of television history. So a lot of exciting things happening at that time for animation.
Mm-hmm. And that was so cool that you were able to be a part of it and like be able to thrive in it. And I saw in your IMDb page that you're often credited as a rough in-betweener or a cleanup artist. Like, could you describe what those types of jobs do?
Absolutely. So at the time, it was an entry-level position. The higher up positions like animator and assistant animators were, they were filled at the time. So just to be at the studio doing things like cleanup and in-betweener, what that does, back in the old days when you would draw every frame, an animator would draw what are called keys, which are the important drawings throughout a scene, in any given scene. And there were so many drawings to do that often there would be assistants or rough in-betweeners to take those key drawings and then fill in the drawings that go in between them. So you had to have a good grasp of movement and rhythm, and understand what the intent of the animator was, and learn and keep the movement going, but also being focused on your own animation. We were doing tests of our own at the time, but a cleanup in betweener and a rough in betweener are parts of the process that were very necessary at the time to really sell the animation before it went to final color or to editorial.
Okay, okay. Yeah, that's something that I hadn't considered when I ever watched like the documentaries on animation or anything, that it always seemed like a little bit more choppy and everything, but that makes sense that that's your role to actually fill up the full amount of time and to get the flow of it. That's really cool.
It's a role that's not really talked about a lot because it's not very glamorous in terms of the process. So the animator is really the star of the scene, and our job as rough in betweeners was just kind of to, our drawing style typically had to look like the animator style, so it wouldn't pop from drawing to drawing. So you kind of got lost in the process, especially when it came to any kind of documentaries or how-to kind of videos. They don't really talk about the assistants, but it did definitely take a certain amount of knowledge of, again, secondary animation and overlap, and you had to really understand a lot of the basics and the rules of animation to execute.
So after doing this in quite a few films, like you got to do films all the way through working on like Atlantis, The Lost Empire, and films like that, what brought you well, actually, rewind first. What was your favorite film that you worked on or have worked on?
I get that question a lot, and the way I answer it is in terms of life experience, because there was so much happening in my life during those 7 years that I was there, that it was I often think about those movies in terms of like what was going on in my life. So I remember loving working on Hercules, the movie. It wasn't necessarily my favorite film to watch, but in terms of like that's when I met my wife and we got married, and like it was a long movie to be on, and I remember just loving the experiences of being with my friends and getting to know Andreas Deja and working on such fun characters. The experiences that I had on that film were some of my favorite.
Oh, that's incredible. That's so cool. And I understand that idea of like the tracking back what you've done and relating it to your personal life, because often that influences so much what like how your work is actually going and things like that.
And how you think about things. And so like now, and I have 2 daughters now, and when I watch the movies with them, I'm watching the movies and I'm like, oh, I remember when that scene was there. It's like we were playing foosball, we won the championship, and I can tell stories behind the scenes that have nothing to do with the movie, but I remember like what was happening in our lives in the time. So it's a really interesting way to think about the films.
That's so cool. So yes, you did that for quite a few years and worked on a lot of films. Then what was the journey like, and did you think it was going to end up like this to eventually decide to start developing Tangled the series? How did that grow out of working in the animation industry?
Yeah, and to answer that question really quickly, no, I never in a million years thought that I would ever develop a television show or want to or be a producer of a show. It never entered my mind. When I was in school at CalArts and then all the way through a lot of my career, the goal was to be an animator, to be like Glenn Keane. Like I think, my peers at the time, all, outside of some of the television folks, we really wanted to be animators. We wanted to be the Disney star animators of the future. And so the concept of developing a show never entered my mind. So we're going to fast forward through a lot of my career and get to the point where Disney Television contacted me because I had worked on, again, Futurama and The Critic, and I worked on a show called Kick Bukowski that was on Disney Channel, and Gravity Falls. So I think for Tangled, a gentleman by the name of Gary Marsh, who runs the channel, was looking for somebody that had experience on both sides. So somebody that kind of knew the tradition and the feature of feature animation, but also had an experience in television animation and knew sort of the process and knew what it took to kind of produce a television show. It was kind of a rare thing to have somebody that knew a little bit of both, and I was available and willing, and they said, would you want to take a swing at this thing? And I said, yeah, I would love to. I love the film. I know a lot of those guys, a lot of the people and the artists that created the film. I'd love to take a swing at developing a story for it. And so that's kind of how that happened. And once it came to developing the story, it really became a project of, let's see how close we can get to the storytelling of the feature as possible and put it on the tracks of a television show. So there were a lot of limitations. Obviously, the movie, even though it's only an hour and a half long, it took 10 years to make. And, we only had, obviously months to make every episode on this show. So it required, understanding the limitations, but also striving for the highest level of excellence that we could. And I feel like we have done that.
I agree. I feel like you've extremely elevated the type of, especially like shows that are connected to the films. I think Tangled the Series really pushed the type of storytelling that can go into shows like that. And hopefully it's a precedent that continues if they continue to make shows like Tangled the Series.
Oh, thank you. I mean, that was definitely the goal in the beginning. I developed it with a really good friend of mine, Shane Prigmore, another good friend of mine, Jim Hall, and, we all looked at each other and said, listen, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it in a way that hopefully hasn't been done before. And again, I'm glad that fans like yourself can recognize the differences between I don't want to say regular television, but some of the other shows on the channel, and what makes Tangled so special. And a lot of that kind of comes from the same spirit that the movie was built on. I think there were a lot of performances and art direction that the film had that hadn't been done before, and we were just kind of taking the baton and from those guys and talking to guys like Nathan Greno and the people that created the feature, and really evolving what was the expectations and lifting them. And I think that's what they did on the film, and that's what we tried to do on the show as well.
Mm-hmm. Because I feel like you were able to really smartly take a lot of the elements that were in Tangled established and be able to continue contextualizing them in a really smart way and make it continue to feel the tone. But I honestly feel like push it in a better direction as you continue to do it, because if I'm going to be completely honest, I love the show a lot, and that made me enjoy the movie more, less the opposite direction.
That's so great that you say that, because again, that was a lot of our intention, was to give the film, we didn't want to just do a show that was separated from the film. We certainly wanted to look at the film and subsequently the short and give those two things context, and give these characters a different perspective, that at the end of seeing, Tangled Ever After, see them in a different way, that they've earned this wedding, and what is the life that they've led up into this point. And I, that's something that we absolutely purposefully intended to do from the beginning. And I think even now, as we're looking at some of these last few episodes, we're really doing that. We were doing something a few weeks ago where we were looking at some of the music for Tangled Ever After. So we were watching the short, and I just kind of looked at it with my new eyes, being like, wow, like these characters, like they're part of me now, and they actually have a story, and they actually earn these little moments. And you see the movie and the short in such a specific context, but then after going through the series, they have a little bit more depth, and they have more connectivity to their events. And I think that's really cool, and I hadn't seen that a lot in series before that. And I think that's what really interested people like Mandy Moore and Zachary Levi and Alan Menken. These people that were attached to the feature didn't have to come back, and they didn't have to like reprise their roles. But I think that when they understood that I wanted to give these characters depth and context, that's what really appealed. I know for Zach, I know that really appealed to him, to take his character and give this whole world some deeper context. Really appealed to everybody.
Mm-hmm. I mean, between the lore and the exploration of the characters more, you can really feel that the story was planned out and was thoughtfully done all the way through. And that was something you did before any animation was done, or even the pitch was done, correct? That you had it all planned out? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that was the assignment, was to really sell the studio on an idea that, listen, we're not just going to do a series, but we're going to really tell a continuation of these characters and this story. And I just had the sense that if I didn't do it that way, that, you know, like if we were to do it, like, let's say we were going to do like a preschool show, that, you know, that wasn't necessarily something that Mandy was interested in coming back for, and Alan Menken probably wouldn't have done the music on the regular that we have on the show. So in order for it to make sense to even make, we kind of had our work cut out for us to really give the show so much more context and so much more depth, because it felt like that was the only way that it was going to happen. Mm-hmm. That's the only way. That's the only choice that we had.
Yeah, for your vision to come through, you had to be able to sell it, because that was something I remember. They approved season 3 like even before season 2 came out, didn't they?
Yeah.
So
we
convinced.
got, you know, we were the studio was very supportive of, and that's the thing that I always look back on the show. Like, there was never a time on the series that we were told, you know, we had such a great support from the studio to get people like Zachary Levi and to get people like Mandy Moore and Alan Menken and subsequently everybody. Kevin Cleese, who did the score, the beautiful score for the film, does the score for the show. And again, that's another thing where he recognized the depth of what we wanted to do on the show and delivers on that. And I think everybody recognized that very early, including myself, that was, again, like, it was our only option.
What did you think was the hardest part of developing the entire story? Was there something that really like held you up?
The idea of, that's a really good question. What was the kind of a hold up on it in terms of developing the story? No, I not that it was. I mean, the whole process is challenging and rewarding. But I think one of the very first things that I asked myself was, you know, and this is something that, you know, as a storyteller, you always ask, like, the first question is like, well, why are we doing this? Why, if we're going to do this, why? What do I have to say about these characters? What is the thing that I want the audience to walk away with? What are the things that these characters need and want that is important to their story? So sitting down and having those long conversations with Shane Prigmore and some of the writers in the beginning, that was, I mean, it was challenging, but it was also super fun to be able to look at the characters and say, like, okay, if we can do anything, what do we want to say? And ultimately, you know, when you're telling stories like this, you want to tell very true stories, right? So I was looking at my own life, and I have two daughters, Ariana and Catalina, my two young, wonderful daughters, and seeing the challenges that they were going through in their lives. And, you know, if you look back at season 1, I've said this many times, but if you look back on season 1, really after everything is said and done, I think a lot of people gravitate towards Varian and Rapunzel, but really season 1 was about King Frederick. and his relationship to Rapunzel. And what I was doing was looking at my relationship with my daughters and understanding that they were going to have to leave my house someday. And I really focused on what was challenging personally about that growth and seeing that growth in my own daughters. So the challenge in developing was finding a true story that people could identify with. And then, characters like Cassandra and Varian and some of the other characters that come along the way certainly support that idea. But the important thing in the process is finding that true story, that truth that I could identify with and really see throughout the entire series.
Mm-hmm. That was definitely something that I recognized in retrospect to season 1 of looking at King Frederick's character and how he was able to slowly devolve into being the overprotective parent that eventually had to completely let go in the end so that he could save his family. It was
It's funny because I get I get a lot of amazing fan mail and emails from people who watch the show, but the ones that mean the most to me are the dads that email me or write me letters and say, like, this is exactly what I'm going through with my daughter. And I certainly didn't want to make a show about an overprotective dad, so we kind of put that story in the background a little bit. But certainly it was important for me to tell that story, and I think if you look back on that first season, it really is about Dad and him. And again, that's what I was going through at the time, is seeing my daughters as not little kids anymore, but growing up and really having a power and a strength that I had never seen before. And I really wanted to give that to King Frederick. Now, and the other thing that is important about that is that here's this character that didn't say anything in the movie. He didn't have a voice at all. So giving him, but he did say so much in his acting and in his role in the movie, with how much he was saddened by the loss of his daughter and her returning. It in his not saying anything, it gave me a window into giving him a voice in the show.
Yeah. And it's so incredible to see the humanization and the very just like personal stories that you're able to create. Because if the first season is about King Frederick, the second one seems like Rapunzel becoming an independent person away from parents and kind of detaching from the people that supported her in Corona as well.
Yeah, there's a lot happening in season 2, but definitely a lot of it had to do with me leaving my house for the first time. And when we that first place they go, Varderos, what's interesting about Varderos is basically when I went to New York for the opening of Pocahontas. We went to the premiere of Pocahontas. We flew to New York, and I'd never been out. I'd never flown that far before. I'd never been to a giant city like that. And so I wanted to kind of give Rapunzel that experience of being out in the world. You notice that when she goes to Varderos, it's very tall, right? There's it's in a kind of a canyon, but the walls are very tall. And that was very much me going to New York, being like, look at how tall these buildings are and these crazy people. And I really wanted to reflect a character who was very much like me, who had been grown up in front of a television and in my house my whole life, going to a big city and experiencing new people and experiencing what seemed like a magical experiences, especially at Disney. So you have things like when they turn into birds, for an example. That was just an extension. That was an extension of me experiencing life for the first time and the when we were launching a lot of these ideas to the writers, is like, try and find those moments of a character who has been separated from the world her entire life and really seeing it for the first time. So that's a lot of what season 2 was.
So what was it like to go from being an artist who experiencing all these new things and getting like kind of achieving your dream of becoming an animator to being an executive producer? Like how were those two jobs different, and did it excite you? Do you have a preference of which one you like?
Well, it's very different. It is a very different experience for sure. But what is so rewarding about it is the chance to be able to not only work with animators, but to be able to work with writers and designers and painters and musicians and actors and the entire process, editors and sound people. And my love of animation had always been from the standpoint of drawing and caricaturing and this kind of flat 2D. My whole experience with animation was like 5 inches in front of my eyes. But opening my experience to dealing with people and communicating with people was to me like so much more fun and so much more visceral, and appreciating the process from a different perspective. I really love it. I think I do love it more than animating itself, just because I get to be inspired and also hopefully inspire all the other aspects of the process of telling these stories. So I do love animating. I love the process of sitting down and drawing, but producing and seeing the entire process from concept all the way to delivery has been so inspiring and so much fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you were able to get a much more macroscopic view on the process, and in doing so, you got to make the big impact and thoughtful decisions that you were able to tell the correct story that you wanted to tell and humanize it and put much more of your own self into the show, which I think is always interesting to hear you talk about, because I've heard of you talking about the connections between, your daughters naming the Queen Ariana and things like that. Yeah. So it's just such a cool thing that you'll be able to look back on and see so much of yourself in this show that people love.
And that's not to say that, obviously I can't go too far without saying that I owe a huge part of this show and its success or its final state to so many people. I've had so many people come up alongside me and the show that have just as much passion for these characters and just as much love of this story that I have. Sometimes, I feel like there are people that love it more than I do, and they're so passionate and they're so willing to give everything that they have to make this thing special. And I think it really comes across in the final product. But everybody along the way, again, Ben Balistreri, who's my co-executive producer, is so passionate about these characters and so wants these things to be just as the quality to be just as high as I do. Jace Rickey, who was our head writer on the show, the dedication that every artist on the show and support person has really made the show what it was. I certainly brought the initial idea and the passion to it, but being able to hand that off to a group of artists and a group of talented, amazing people along the way has also been very rewarding to me, to be able to see other people take ownership over certain parts of the show. And I'd love to be able to say I did everything, but I didn't do. I did a very small part in a very large process, and I just happened to be the guy that was running alongside of it the whole way.
Mm-hmm. And that's very clear to see that this is a passion project by a large group of people, because if
Yes.
it was only you, it couldn't be the force that it truly is and tell the story in such a beautiful way that you've been able to lead it to do.
I mean, looking at like even the art direction, we got an Emmy for our art direction last year. Alan Bodner, who leads up our art department. Just the color of the show is just gorgeous, and the character designs are so beautiful. And again, the score is gorgeous, and Alan Menken's music, like every part of it is such a high quality that there's very little to not be extremely proud of.
Mm-hmm. The story, art, and the music, it just always takes me away. And especially Alan Menken music. What I remember listening to Ready as I'll Ever Be at the end of season 1, and that like gave me chills, and that was what I was showing to anyone who I knew was a Disney fan for the longest time.
You know what was funny about that song is like it had come together obviously before it aired, but anybody, you know, I had a version of it on my phone because I like video or shot it on my phone, and I was going around and showing like anybody that I could grab in the studio, like, you got to see this song, man, it's so cool. It was such a different level of quality of music that was so epic and so unlike anything else that was on television at the time. But I still listen to that music and I'm so proud of it.
Mm-hmm. I've got the grand majority of the Tangled the Series songs in my Disney playlist on Spotify. I'm a huge fan of it all.
Great.
So moving forward in season 3, is there anything that you want us fans to be looking for, or that we should be trying to take away from the final step in Rapunzel's journey?
Well, obviously there's a wedding that we're getting to, so we know the end of this entire thing. But what I would say going into season 3 is just let it come. You know, I think a lot of people have theories on what's going to happen, and they try and get ahead of it. And I would just ask that you just turn it on and enjoy the ride. There's going to be a lot of crazy things that happen, shocking things, rewarding things, triumphant things that are going to happen in season 3. But ultimately, it's about this beautiful world, these amazing characters, and I just hope people are come away from it inspired and encouraged.
Mm-hmm. I'm so looking forward to it, and I can't wait to talk about it and make lots of videos about it.
Thanks.
Absolutely. Chris, where do you see your journey going in the future after Tangled the Series?
That's a great question. Listen, after having this taste of lifting animation on television, at least in my eyes, to this level, I don't want to stop. I want to keep doing more important stories. I want to lift music. I want to lift characters. I want to do the same thing that I see live action really getting to do. I see live action television shows and series lifting the bar and being taken just as seriously as feature films. Mm-hmm. I think animation still has a long way to go. I still feel like a lot of people look at animation as a babysitter, and it's still kind of something that culturally in this country we still look at animation as something that's for young kids. Mm-hmm. And I still feel that animation has a long way to go with some of the stories that we can tell. There are artists out there that have an amazing voice that I'd love to be able to give voices to in terms of art direction and depth, and I think the writing can go even deeper. So I want to keep going. I want to take what we've done and what has inspired a lot of people and lift it, and let's just keep going and see how far we can go with it.
Mm-hmm. I absolutely agree. I think animation is a medium that can be universally beloved and appreciated. And so I wish you all the best going forward with it. I hope you get some type of Disney Plus show or something like that after Tangled the Series. It would be amazing. I'd definitely watch.
Mm-hmm. I think thanks so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Mm-hmm. I hope everybody gets excited for season 3. And I can't wait to see and experience the feedback as it airs.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Chris, can I ask you one more question? Do you have time for that?
Absolutely. All the time you need.
Okay. So I want you to tell the listeners, now that you've been able to work at one of the most magical companies on earth and be able to explore a show and be able to work on masterpiece films, what is your one large piece of advice that you would tell people to help them follow their dreams?
That is a large, Isaac, you're ending with a large question.
Yeah.
I would ratchet it down a little bit. I think a lot of people go into this thing thinking that their goal is to work for Disney or to work for Pixar. And I would just inspire people to kind of back off a little bit and just really look inward and be true to yourself in your artwork, in your style. Be inspired by things, absolutely. Buy those making of books and be inspired by those. But at the end of the day, really find who you are as an artist. Because I can tell you right now, the portfolios and the things that I look at when I'm looking at artists aren't somebody that draw just like Disney or something that I've seen in the past 500 times. I love looking for someone that has a unique voice in their art and in the way that they draw and the opinions that they have in their storyboards or in their designs. I get very bored with designs that just look like the 15 other things that I've seen. But it's very inspiring when I see somebody that knows who they are as an artist and can bring something new and special to any given project. So I would just inspire anybody listening to this to really find who they are as an artist, and don't set a goal on a studio, but set a goal to be the best artist that you can be, whether that be a designer or an animator or a writer. Be the best artist that you feel like you can be, and I guarantee you all of these studios will come looking for you rather than you looking for them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that absolutely does. You have to look inward before you can expect everything to come to you or for you to approach them. That you have to figure out what you want first and what you want to be. Man,
I think that's the most important thing. I see a lot of young artists who try and tailor their style because they think they know what the studios are looking for, and I get really sad when I see some people giving up a piece of their own dynamic style to fit something that they think is expected. And I would just encourage your listeners to be inspired and to watch movies and to see things that inspire you to create. But at the end of the day, to kind of let that go and see what happens when you are honest with yourself, not only when it comes to writing or drawing or animating, and put as much of yourself into your work as possible.
I think that's amazing advice and such a beautiful way to end this episode of the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on, Chris. It's been an absolute pleasure to be able to speak to you.
It is my honor, and thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. To all of you who are listening, if you haven't seen Tangled the series before, please go catch up and check out season 3 on March 7th. And if you enjoyed this discussion, let me know by rating the podcast and subscribing. It would also mean a lot if you followed me over on Instagram at Watso Videos and considered supporting the show by supporting me over on Patreon, which will also be linked below. To all of you fun people who are out in the world, thanks for listening, and have a magical day.